Welcome to San Diego Integral, December 10th, 2022. Our topic for today, using integral polarity practice to thrive, presented by John Kesler.
Welcome to San Diego Integral. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Eloy, your host, and I'm a member of San Diego Integral's leadership team, along with Jerry Golick, Kathleen Andrews, Tom Habib, and Liz O'Leary, who's not here today. We have an exciting presentation today using integral polarity practice to thrive with John Kesler. IPP is an amazingly comprehensive framework and practice. I've just learned more about it in the last few days, and we'll learn more about it and we'll do some practices with it in the next few minutes. Before we start, please note that we're recording this meeting and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. If you prefer not to be seen on video, you can stay off camera by not unmuting and speaking. The recording only features the speakers, and any breakout room activity will not be recorded, so you don't have to worry about what you say in the breakouts. We love to have you participate. That's a great way to connect with other members in the community and to practice the work. The link to the recording will be posted in a day or two after the meeting. We'll post the link. And oh yeah, I forgot, today we're going to be experimenting with a new transcription tool. I'll start that in a minute. It's called Phantom, and it's just a way of capturing the gems of wisdom as they come up for later review, so we can post them in our website or something. Yeah, correct. Non-speaking audience will not be recorded. That's correct. Also, you can find all our event information at our website at sandiegointegral.org. And we're also on Meetup, and we have a Facebook page you should be able to find. So please join one of those groups, and that way you'll be automatically notified when a new event is added. If you have any questions or comments about these meetings, you're welcome to contact one of the leadership team through Meetup or Facebook, or email if you have our emails. Now we're working on scheduling speakers for the next few months, and we'll post our January speaker in the next few days. So save the second Saturday of each month at this time for future meetings. And in February, we're going to be having Kim Barta back. So we're excited about that. And finally, if you wish to make a small donation to help us keep this organization going, we do these presentations for free, and the donations help cover our social media fees and hosting and all that stuff. So you can or donate at sandiegointegral.org as well. I'll post that link in a few. And then so a few more housekeeping things before we get started. We'll have some Q&A at some point. So for this, you're welcome to either at the time you're invited to unmute your mic or to raise your hand using the raised hand button. And if you're on a tablet or desktop, this is at the lower edge of your screen. And on a phone or tablet, you may need to touch the screen to activate the menu at the bottom and find it under More. And our chat hosts, some of our leadership team will be monitoring the chat for any questions, and we can ask questions for you if you don't want to ask them yourself. And right after the meeting at 6 p.m. Pacific, we'll have a 30 to 60 minutes for further exploration, Q&As, and you're all welcome to stay for that. And before we start the meeting, we'd like to welcome newcomers. I know it's always good to see familiar faces, but we love having new people join us too. So if you're new today, we invite you to introduce yourself. So you can unmute, just say your name, where you're calling from, and how you heard about San Diego Integral. So whoever wants to volunteer first.
I can go ahead. I'm Ann Kay. I'm calling in from Victoria, BC, Canada. I'm on an island in the middle of the Pacific. I first heard about San Diego integral from you, Eloy. And something popped up around the polarity exercise or practice, which caught my eye. So this is why I'm here at the moment. Thank you.
Hey, welcome in.
Thank you.
Anyone else new today?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Eloy. So yeah, my name is Kyle, and I'm from Orange County, California, so not too far away from San Diego, up in Fullerton, if you're familiar with the area. And yeah, I've been into Ken Wilber's work and integral theory for a while now, and discovered San Diego Integral on YouTube. So
Yay.
mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kyle.
I see my friend Daniel down there. Daniel, you want to just say hi and quick introduction?
I guess that'd be me. Hi, Daniel Kirkpatrick. I'm in Bellingham, Washington, also known as land of the Laktamish, Lummi, and Nooksack peoples. And I ran into some of you folks at the WTF Integral Conference last month, which was really an awesome experience. And happy to be tapped in a little bit to the San Diego group. And Jerry, thank you very much for sending word along of this event. Happy to be here.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Tom.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Last call. Well, thanks for everybody. Thanks to everybody for joining us. We're really excited. To introduce our presenter today, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jerry Gulick. So, and I want to thank Kabir Kadre for recommending John to us. Even though Kabir's not here, he'll see this on the recording. So to you, Jerry.
All right, thank you. So I thought I would introduce John with in an integral way. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the 4 quadrants, and they can boil down to the big 3, the good, the true, and the beautiful. So I'm going to say some true things about John to start with. So John Kesler is an attorney, an integrally informed writer, lecturer, consultant, and teacher. He's the founder of the Integral Polarity Practice, or IPP, which is a spiritual and life practice that he shares globally. He's the co-founder and chair of Unify, grounded in IPP principles, which specializes in integrally informed mentoring of organizations and networks that are working on bridging democracy reform, transformative public policy, and multi-sectoral and multi-generational societal transformation. And Unify also sponsors Leaders Network, Solutions Labs, grassroots chapters, and a periodic summit and festival. Unify is currently engaging in 40 states and 7 countries. So those are all true things about John. Pretty amazing. Let me say some good things about John. And I'm going to just actually quote somebody, an expert on the subject of this, about being good relating to integral, which is, I'm going to quote Ken Wilber. So there is nobody doing more leading edge work on the integration of Eastern and Western approaches to consciousness and growth than John Kesler. This fully integral approach includes conventional and contemplative dimensions of psychology and spirituality, spanning body and mind and spirit and shadow, a truly remarkable and effective approach. I give his work my highest recommendation. Comment from Ken Wilber, I'd say that's pretty good. And if we move to the beautiful, I'm going to say, what I'll do with that is I will speak from the voice of the student who loves his teacher, John Kesler. And I would say over the years, some of my most beloved teachers and friends and practitioners would say, like in a quiet moment, they would say, have you ever heard of John Kesler? Or they would say, yeah, my teacher's John Kesler. And so I heard of John for a long time in the 25 years that I've been studying integral. And at some point I became one of his students. Now there are top students and then some of the rest of us. And I'm sure I'm in the top 95%, but I would say even as a not very good student, some of the most profound moments that I've had in the last several years have come from John's teachings. So it is a great honor to introduce you to a wonderful teacher and loving person with many gifts to give to the world, and that is John Kesler.
Well, thanks so much, Jerry and Eloy. I appreciate being here with you. I've noticed that everybody is frozen a few times, which means that I've frozen for you. So if that happens, just, let's be aware of that, and we'll just try to catch up where we are. Another thing is this is going to be, these 2 hours are going to be heavily experiential. And for those who want to stay at the end, we'll have more time to debrief. And we do this experiential work through voice dialogue, which works really well with groups. And for instance, we're going to work initially with a polarity, the relational polarity in IPP called agency and communion. And so I asked to speak to the voice of agency, and I'll say, who am I speaking to? And then you would just speak from that aspect of yourself, that functional aspect. And we're never speaking to the self. The self's always the everyday self, or however you define that, is off to the side. So one of the challenges here is that we have enough people that we're on a couple of screens. So I won't be able to call on people who raise their hands. So I'm just going to ask, I think we'll handle it all right. I'll just ask people to speak up, and whoever speaks up, I'll just respond to that as best I can. And so before we start, why don't we just take a moment to settle in, just to become present and centered. Okay, thank you. And there are several people that I recognize I've practiced with before, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Suzanne Greuter, who connected with me very, very early on as I was developing this practice, and was a tremendous mentor and guide to me with her wealth of background and wisdom. And so I'm grateful, Suzanne, to see you present with us today. So we'll just enter into a conversation, and I'll just ask you to speak back to me. But first of all, I'll say I'd like to speak to the voice of agency, please. Who am I speaking to? And you don't need to speak back verbally, but just say agency, and then I'll speak from agency, and you'll speak from agency, and we'll just have a conversation. And there's a tendency in a brand new introduction to sort of just sit back and listen, which is fine, but I'd invite several of you to speak up and participate to make it interesting and engaging for the group. So I'd like to speak to the voice of agency, please. Who am I speaking to?
The voice of agency.
Yeah. So as agency, tell me, what is it? What is your function? What is your job in the life of the self? What do you do? And please, anybody just speak up, and we'll just try to handle this informally. As agency, what do you do?
I make Susan do things.
Okay, you make.
Prod her.
I make decisions.
Make decisions.
I negate entropy as a homemaker and caregiver.
You negate entropy. That certainly sounds like you do. Yeah, thank you.
I accomplish things.
You accomplish things.
I become.
You become. Say a little bit more about that.
I emerge into something from nothing.
Okay, you emerge into something from nothing.
I get my taxes done.
Okay, you get your taxes done.
I take the lead.
You take the lead. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Does the self identify with you closely or
Yes.
uh-huh.
When I
Sometimes.
remember, I get the body to bed and get it meals.
I think I heard a voice, but I just didn't quite hear what was said.
Oh, when I remember, I get myself to bed and get myself meals.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, lots of healthy, aware, articulate voices of agency. I'd like to speak to the other polar quality, please. I'd like to speak to the voice of communion, please. The function, that function. I'd like to speak to communion, please. Who am I speaking to?
Communion. Voice of communion.
As communion, tell me what your role is. What do you do? How are you of service?
I listen.
You listen.
Establish relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Establish relationships.
I shake things up between people.
Interesting. You shake things up between people.
I keep trying to get agencies' attention.
Oh, you try to get agencies' attention. Why is that?
Well, as self, I'm very comfortable in agency, sometimes too comfortable for my environment, and I try hard to work with my communal self, and we have this symbiotic of a sort relationship that is a work in progress.
Okay, well, let me speak to other voices of communion about your relationship with the agency. What is your relationship with agency in the life of the self?
When I'm fully engaged, agency is effortless.
Okay, agency is effortless when you're fully engaged. Okay.
I would say
Agency. Go ahead.
I'm seeking resonance with agency. So I want to try to find things that I can do that still meet my desire for communion.
Okay. Seeking resonance in that way. Interesting. Yeah.
When my energy naturally flows out toward others, agency is a natural and instinctively cooperative partner.
Okay. Instinctively cooperative partner. Yeah.
I enlist agency to serve me, serving others, like bringing a meal to a sick friend.
I froze just for a moment there. Could you repeat that, please?
I enlist agency to help me, such as bringing a meal to a sick friend.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like you collaborate a lot. Yeah. So I'd like to speak to a perspective, a voice of a perspective that transcends, but includes both agency and communion, can see how both of these qualities have spoken up, how they function, what they're aware of, how they relate. But now this voice that sees them both and holds them both, they're both a part of you. I'd like to speak to this transcend and include voice, please. Who am I speaking to?
You're speaking to the witness.
From your perspective, do you see anything in addition or different than agency or communion did from their perspective?
Sometimes from either of those two perspectives, there's like a conflict from one or the other. But from this perspective, I find the places where there's connection and where I can accomplish both.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
When I'm leading with communion, I feel love. When I'm leading with agency, I feel competitive. So transcend and include, I'm not sure, but Those two feelings are very distinct.
Okay, thank you.
For me, the distinction is that one has will and the other one encompasses love. So when
Okay.
they are merged together, they become one action.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's drop into that place where they are not two actions, where the energy related to a relationship, where there's always a quality of fear, is no longer there. I would like to speak to the quality of transcendent trust, please. This is the voice that and quality of consciousness that has no fear, that has absolute trust. However you frame that, it can reach that in the divine, in the absolute, higher self. I'd like to speak to the voice of transcendent trust, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent trust.
And let's just settle here just for a moment, settle into this transcendent trust. As transcendent trust, what does this feel like?
It feels like a mystical knowing.
Okay, a mystical knowing.
And
Couldn't quite hear that. There was a little breakup. Could you say that again?
the unknown feels like a deep soul friend.
Thank you.
What a relief.
What a relief.
It feels peaceful.
Thank you.
It feels like it healed a rift.
Heals a rift.
A softening, more being, less becoming.
This still point quality is, we call it a virtue of being. Yeah, a place of being.
Not sure how best to articulate this. It's a place from looking, like I call it a locus of awareness, wherever we're looking from, that recognizes that there are many in the world. So coming to this trust issue, it's like trust of what? Trusting in the transcendent is, for me, experientially not identical with trusting the non-transcendent. So to trust purely the transcendent and blindly trust the pre-transcendent can be very problematic in my experience. A great
I think I'm listening to Larry speak. I'd like to speak to Larry's voice of transcendent trust, please. Who am I speaking to?
Larry's transcendent voice of trust.
Okay. Yeah. From this place, how does this feel?
Sitting here in this chair just fine.
Yeah. Does Larry have pretty good access to you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'd like to speak to a quality that naturally arises, I call a virtue of doing, that arises from each one of these still points, that arises from transcendent trust. I'd like to speak to transcendent love, please. Who am I speaking to?
You talking to me or to the group, John?
To the group. I'm speaking to all you voices of transcendent love. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent love.
Transcendent love. Yeah. So let's just settle in for a moment as transcendent love. As transcendent love, what are some of your gifts to the self and others, to the cosmos?
Presence.
Presence.
No boundaries.
No boundaries. Are there any limits to your reach as transcendent love?
There's infinite compassion.
Infinite compassion.
Openness.
Openness.
The simplicity of an open heart.
The simplicity of an open heart.
Honesty.
Honesty.
Mary says compassion.
Compassion.
Being with the infinite and the eternal.
Yes, being with the infinite and the eternal.
Leaving behind preference.
Leaving behind preference. Yeah.
Multi-perspectival.
Okay, thank you.
Absolute openness.
Absolute openness. Is there anything you're not open to? Anything you're not empathetic with?
Not for this place.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No judgment.
Thank you.
I feel playfulness.
Playfulness. Yeah. Yeah.
Pre-exists words, symbols, language.
Yeah. Pre-exist. All of that. Concepts, language. Yeah.
What I'm not open to from this place is going back into limitation.
Okay. Yeah. No limitation here. And with each one of these virtues of doing, because it's a descending or involutionary quality of engagement in the world, there's a transcendent polarity that emerges out of this transcendent love. I'd like to speak to one of those two poles. I'd like to speak to the voice of transcendent sorrow, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent sorrow.
Transcendent sorrow.
Transcendent sorrow. This transcendent sorrow, what are your gifts?
Compassion.
Compassion, or is there any limitation to your compassion?
The only limitation is the reluctance to flow back into non-transcendence.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
There's love in the sorrow.
There's a love in this sorrow. Yeah. Yeah.
Continuing on and having the agency despite the heaviness.
Well, that's right. With this deep quality of empathy and endless capacity, gives the self the ability to walk through the most terrible of scenarios, perhaps a field of genocidal carnage, and to calmly and appropriately do what's needed, compassionately, without limitation, beyond normal human capacity, embracing everything and everyone.
Arlene says transcendent sorrow, terrific at avoiding confrontation.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to speak to the polar counterpart of transcendent sorrow. I'd like to speak to transcendent joy, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent joy.
Okay. Oh. This transcendent joy, what does this feel like? What are your gifts?
I offer thousands of moments during the day to experience the delight of being alive and just having a world around me and people around me.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Radiance.
Radiance. Radiance.
Energy.
Energy. Yeah.
The ecstasy of transmuting flow.
The ecstasy of transmuting flow. Oh, beautiful.
Mary says absolute delight.
Absolute delight. Yeah. Yeah.
Unencumbered.
Unencumbered. Yeah.
I'm also a substance, like champagne overflowing.
Okay. Yeah. So as transcendent joy, could you really exist without transcendent sorrow?
No.
Yeah.
No.
And this is the exact opposite of the message of the world, which says avoid pain, avoid challenge, avoid sorrow. But from this place, we see that we need to, in a sense, descend below all things, to rise above all things, to embrace and love all suffering and the world in order to understand and appreciate and embody this transcendent quality of ultimate joy. Does the self have pretty good access to you as transcendent joy?
From time to time.
Yeah.
As the voice of transcendent joy, which joins with the love for me, I feel like Joanne is always in touch with me. But as Joanne, Joanne doesn't consciously feel always in touch with me.
Okay. Yeah. I'd like to speak to transcendent sorrow, please. Again, who am I speaking to?
Transcendent sorrow.
Okay. Does the self have pretty good access to you?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there anything?
Sometimes. Yes.
Is there anything you might want to say to the self?
Hang in there.
Hang in there. Absolutely.
Don't avoid me.
Yeah. I'd like to speak to that foundation out of which you both arise, to this quality of transcendent love. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent love.
Transcendent love.
As transcendent love, I'm going to invite you to go into a breakout session and speak in groups of 3 or 4 to one another as transcendent love, and also as needed or appropriate, moving to transcendent joy or sorrow, about your role in the life of the self, about how the world can be impacted by your presence, and just share with one another what might be possible if you were more present in the world, if you were more present in the life of the self, holding the depth of transcendent sorrow and the ultimate joy of transcendent joy, all grounded in you as transcendent love. And so I'll ask Kathleen now if she can maybe break us into breakout rooms, just to have that conversation for about 15 minutes, speaking not about transcendent love or joy or sorrow, but speaking to, from this voice, from this quality of transcendent love. Thank you.
Have to admit, I've been pretty captivated. I'm going to just check on the settings.
John, clarify if you would, speaking from transcendent love how that interplays with transcendent joy and transcendent sorrow?
They both flow out of, are grounded in transcendent love. So they are qualities, emanations of transcendent love, and have their existence by both being grounded in transcendent love. Yeah. And so speak from these qualities to one another about how you might impact the self, how you might impact the world. And you'll be in these breakout rooms for about 15 minutes.
All right, I'm going to open rooms and we'll see you back in 15 minutes.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Okay, it looks like we're all back. We'll just spend the next 25 or 30 minutes just debriefing a little bit about your experience with this facilitation, your experience trying to speak from these transcendent qualities, and I'll be responding to your questions. And in that context, I'll just begin orienting you a little bit about the IPP as a practice. But I thought rather than starting in our heads, I wanted to start in an experience. So I'd love any comments that you might have with regard to that last 15 minutes or the experience of the facilitation, anything you might want to bring up.
Are we just talking again without hands up?
What I would suggest, folks, is if it's not crowded, just go right ahead. If we start to build a queue, if you go down into the reactions button, you can click raise your hand, and then it'll line us up in order of who has questions.
Okay.
And I'm thinking just for now, so just jump in and see if we can process just spontaneously.
Well, I guess I'd share that I feel a little happy and spacey.
Okay. All right.
And I echo that feeling.
Okay.
Really
So how did that
different.
transcendent sorrow settle in for you?
Who are you asking?
Maybe Joanne.
Oh, well, that's what's odd for me. Of transcendent love and transcendent joy. It doesn't, it's not sorrow. It just loves and it just holds. The sorrow isn't there. I can't find that. The sorrow feels lower down, more. Myself has plenty of it, but and sees plenty of it.
Yeah.
It just holds and loves. I don't know. That's all I got.
And one thing, and sometimes it takes a little practice to get into the energy, the place of consciousness and function, particularly of these transcendent qualities. And words really get in the way. But using words, there's a real distinction between suffering and sorrow. It's the deepest possible empathy with the suffering in the world, and to take ownership of that and to fully hold that. And where every possible conditioning quality of our society tries to have us minimize suffering or sorrow, and yet if we open ourselves up to the fullness of empathy and holding all of the suffering in the world, it can be a magnificent experience to hold that polarity, and they support one another, both grounded in love.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, John, the expansion of the joy and the sorrow in opposite directions created greater capacity for the transcendent love.
Yeah, just more fully waking up the full dimensions of how transcendent love embraces.
The transcendent sorrow for me feels so sweet, and myself in sorrow feels sharp like a knife. It feels really different.
Yeah. And it is fascinating to experience the transcendent qualities really coming out of a place of oneness and beingness, where the ego isn't in the way and the defenses aren't there, and the full quality of the energy of love without limits and without qualifications. And to counterpoint that in terms of how you experience these qualities in an everyday way, it's really to define more clearly how to come from a deeper place and understand and work with the less transcendent dimensions of how we carry a particular aspect, such as love.
When I was younger, and I was saying in the group that I was, very goal driven, very, I experienced sorrow. I did not have a concept of transcendent sorrow, and I was happy, but I don't think I had a concept of transcendent joy either. And once transcendent sorrow was experienced, that that made the ascending. What I said was that what I used to feel about sorrow is that all I wanted to do was get the hell out of there, but transcendent sorrow, that's a place that's not a place that you have to run from. That's the place that from which transcendent joy for me becomes known to me. And the difference between that and being happy.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
What came up for me was from a place of transcendent sorrow, it deepened my empathy. And from there, it could move me to transcendent love. And from that place, being of service. And then being of service took me to transcendent joy.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, these are so deeply interconnected. It's fascinating where we can find our entry point. But once we find our way in, they all flow into one another and out of one another. Yeah, it's a wonderful example.
Yes, that was one of the conclusions we came to in our group. I was in the group with Stephen, that each one gives access to the others. Each one can be the entry point to all. And toward the end, we were playing with the idea, we'd mutually come around to the Trinity, and then the Christian Trinity, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. And then we were asking ourselves which was which, just as we reached the breakout, at the end of the breakout. And that's continued to kind of circulate in me. And I feel, well, the Father, of course, is the transcendent love, because that's where everything that exists emanates from, the origin. So that leaves the Holy Spirit, which emanates out, the agape, the transcendent joy, and the transcendent sorrow would be the Son, Jesus Christ, who offered himself to be crucified to take on the sins of the world. And I know a lot about the history of the West. I mean, this was the way millions and millions of people in the Christian world could deal with their sorrows, with the horrors, the horrible suffering in their lives, is to say Christ took on this suffering for me, and that opened them to the love. And that's the eros, the way back. So this cycle, as I see it, this cycle from the outpouring and the going back, the efflux and the reflux, the sorrow is part of the path back into the transcendent.
Yeah, thank you. And it's fascinating how many faith traditions and belief traditions use these patterns to to hold these energies and these deep qualities. And there is a trinity. So in this instance, we have trust. And transcendent trust yielding transcendent love, but there's also an attitude that arises, a quality of character, you might call it a virtue of becoming, of transcendent hope. And it's not a hope for things, but it's a hopefulness in every moment. From this place, I can deal appropriately with anything that arises. And so trust or faith, hope, and charity, I mean, all of these fit together. You could find the patterns coming up in many traditions because they belong to one another. And I might also say that of these still points, these qualities of being, I work with 3 stages of them. A concrete stage of trust, and in this relational environment, trust is very simple and childlike, and it's sort of in the third person.
We lost a few words there, John. Can you repeat that one?
And moving from trust, there's a more subtle quality of the still point of communion, and that's is picked up deeply in traditions where there's a God or a divinity or a quality to be in relationship with. And then the third quality is more of a causal quality of union. And so it kind of allows one to practice in a third, second, and first person aspect of the absolute in terms of that arises out of this relational environment. So that's a powerful element of these still points as well. Even though whatever still point you're in, it's sort of the same experience. I mean, you are having a quality outside of an experience outside of space and time. I want to say a little bit more about how we work with the polarities generally, but let me just pause for a moment just to allow any of you to jump in with regard to that or something that you're particularly interested in with what we've gone over so far.
I'd like to share an experience that I had. I was with Eno, and Eno speaks Japanese, but not English, so he had a translator. So it was a very interesting experience to enter the liminal with someone who does not have the same language. And so it took an extraordinary amount of deep listening to have a sense of the energetics and the dynamics of what was occurring between us. And what we were able to discover together was a healing of deep cultural sorrows that might have encompassed our own backgrounds. And it didn't take any words. It simply took a dynamic that occurred that I might call reciprocity. There was a flow between us in an understanding that was beyond words. And yet we could feel it deeply in each other's hearts. So it was melodic. It was transformative. It had a very beautiful quality to it. And I guess we could call it transcendent love, but somehow it seemed even beyond that. It had an intimacy without knowing each other. It was a quality and an energetic, and it had a frequency that was beyond anything that I have experienced. So I just want to express my gratitude to Eno for having held the space.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, words get in the way. We're trying to find a word to open up a space to enter into of consciousness and energy and beingness, and to have a beautiful cross-cultural experience that transcended our cultural, our Western or Eastern framings of things, to actually share in that beautiful transcendent quality together. That's so moving. Thank you for sharing.
I'd also like to recognize you as the translator, because she was holding the space and bringing the reciprocity between us backwards and forwards. So there was a circularity of movement.
Beautiful. Yeah.
John,
Just-
it's occurring to me that the transcendent hope and transcendent love are the elements needed for sacred activism.
I think they're very central, and you can practice these. You can practice the love and practice the hope to get deeper access to the trust, or you can be in the trust, and those qualities of activism, of attitude and engagement naturally arise. So they're mutually informing and mutually supportive of one another, and it's a beautiful practice. Let me just quick say one thing about the structure of the facilitation of IPP, and it's the same with all the polarities. And I have a couple of handfuls of polarities that seem to match well with primary tensions, polar dynamics at each stage of development, and a handful that we just are born with. But if these polarities are functioning in a less mature way, they are opposed to one another. They're fighting one another. They're competing for attention and control. And then you learn to sort of move from one to the other, so the other can do its job, and you might sort of be in a balancing act. And then you move into a quality of both and then they begin to interpenetrate and dance together and inform one another. And then when you get to that still point and can hold the field, these polar qualities aren't solidly there. You know, they are different flavors, or along some spectrum of however you hold that spectrum, that can be there together, and just the right combination can be there to be of service, ideally, to what is opened up through the still point of one's deepest wisdom and compassion, for instance, that one has access to. So as I work with, or we work in groups, or we have workshops, just to learn how you're experiencing, understanding what the trajectory is, helps you understand sort of where you are in the spectrum of maturity in terms of holding that dynamic, until they come together, and then there's a oneness, a quality of beingness. And then the quality that flows out of that, the ego is gone and the fears are gone. And it's a spiritual quality of being in the world from a place of deep oneness, and yet embrace and engagement. I'm just trying to check our time. I think we have, let's see, we have about 5 more minutes. And so maybe what I'll just say in terms of a little bit of an overview, and I did mention it, is we have primary polarities that are archetypal or universal, central to each stage of development. The wonderful work, for instance, that Suzanne and her colleague Bina Sharma have done, have identified many polarities that are characteristic of stages of development and how people work with. I've sort of stayed with multidimensional systems that interpenetrate, but nevertheless, if we find that central stillness within ourselves and can work with the dynamics that are there, it helps us therapeutically work with and fully engage with, and come from a place of inner stillness with regard to the polarities we have access to. And it prepares us to be reborn, in a sense, to a higher quality of identity and integrative function through the stages of development. And it's just a wonderful practice that I love. So that's just another little comment about the practice, and maybe I'll throw it back to you for a few minutes for comments or further questions.
Yeah, John, Marjorie has a question in the chat. Where's the space for the shadow? Is it included as part and parcel of wholeness and the transcendent love?
Well, every polarity is dealing with a particular dimension of ourselves. and none of us tend to grow through these qualities without being somewhat repressed or not highly functional or fully conscious. And so to the extent we work with polarities where people identify have a stuckness or a repression or a lack of flow or capacity, there are different qualities of shadow related to each polarity. You can sort of work with that. Flourishing is coming from a deep inner stillness and having a freedom of functionality, being guided by your deepest inspiration, say, for instance, of light, love, and life is one way I like to. And to the extent that that's stuck or that's not happening, you can sort of go and speak from those, meditate from those, work with those qualities. And so it's therapeutic in that way, and you're working just by definition with shadow elements that become more conscious and become more functional and become more aware.
Joanne's got her hand raised. Why don't you go ahead, Joanne?
Okay. It seems I'm a psychologist who's been doing psychotherapy for a very long time. And I really agree with you and see those dynamics, especially in couples, right there, it's happening. And the crux of the work that I try to do lots of times that I am doing with people is it's like the dynamics of this kind of structure. You know, these are patterns which you could call structures, and the dynamics of them and where it can be pried loose. And you know, sometimes I use strengths in one area of a person's life and kind of bring it over so it's already familiar to them. Or sometimes there's a bit of what Margaret Mahler, you know, calls frustrating, somehow, some theme along this line of kind of gently holding the person, but frustrating the younger, or questioning it through a questioning of it, or just reflecting back of it. So I guess what I'm saying, my point is that it's a huge question for me. It's just huge. I mean, I would like to see a book on, like, you know, how people make those shifts. Thank you.
People in the therapeutic professions use IPP as a tool. I mean, it's one framework, it's one structure, it's a construct, you know, but it seems to work well and be helpful. I don't even suggest it as a sole spiritual or life practice, but as a complement, as it might be useful, and it is a useful tool for these very dynamics that you're talking about, Joanne. So what I'd like to do is we're debating how much we would talk about things rather than have experiences, and we divided it up mostly into having experiences. So I'm just going to facilitate you more quickly in another polarity, and you know, these are very foundational polarities. I mean, moving from living with fear to trust. So paradoxically, you can see more clearly what you should trust and what you with love and hopefulness, to a polarity which is just a very basic polarity of desire and aversion, the basic quality of intent. And there's several polarities underneath that are more central to the classic meditative traditions, but this is sort of at the top of that and abutting the relational polarity of desire and aversion. And it's moving from a place of scarcity and deficit to a place of coming from a place of abundance and fullness. And if you can come from a place of trust and love, and from a place of abundance, fullness, and possibility, and generosity and gratitude, it's a game changer. You can really stabilize in those qualities. And I'd just like to maybe facilitate this one polarity quickly, not through voice dialogue, but then get into these still point qualities that are related to the virtue dynamic. So what I'd like to do is, and I'll say speak to or call forth, but we won't do this verbally, and let's even just do it a little bit meditatively. So if you want to close your eyes or however you would like to do that. But I'd like to call forth this quality of desire, of the desire that I want things, I pursue things, I seek things. From the most primal quality, it arises when before we're born. I need something, I want something, or to the highest spiritual goals that I might have, I seek after this experience. Feel that energy and that quality. And how, like with any pole of a classic polarity of this nature, if the other pole isn't there, it can just get out of control. This is classic quality of addiction, this pole without the other pole. And let's move over now and inhabit this quality of avoiding something and pulling away. And this energy, which is in its own way so addictive for some of us. We pull away from so many things. We never give things a chance. Or we shut down important energies or even golden shadows. We just don't allow them to emerge. We just, we're always pulling away. And the energy here, it's activated by this sense of deficit. I never have enough. I'll never be satisfied. To have intent and move forward, I have to come from this place of deficit. But as these qualities come together, desire and aversion, and they interpenetrate and they just become one quality of energy and consciousness and capacity and service of the deepest qualities of intent and most spiritual, divine, oneness-based qualities of ego not being in the way. What the still point that brings this energy to a resting place is a place of absolute contentment in this moment. Deeply satisfied, I'm mentally and emotionally content. And I'd like to ask the quality of this sense of deep fullness and abundance to come forward, please. And I'd like to speak to this quality of transcendent fullness or abundance, please. Who am I speaking to?
Transcendent fullness and abundance.
And now let's re-engage using our voice a little bit. First, let's just settle into this place of contentment and fullness, absolute abundance without limit in this moment. What does this feel like, this quality, this experience, this beingness of fullness and abundance?
It feels like it's uncovering a hidden gift.
Okay, uncovering a hidden gift.
Exuberant peace.
Feels like the ringing of a crystal bell.
Wow, the ringing of a crystal bell.
The way out of illusory awareness.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want anything, and I feel very still.
Yeah, don't want a thing. Utter stillness.
Barry says lightness.
Lightness, yeah.
Resting.
Resting.
Feels like coming home.
Like coming home. Yeah, yeah.
Uplifting.
Uplifting. And coming from this place, we're always confronted with possibilities rather than problems. We have the endless resource of perfection within us at this moment. And a quality naturally of transcendent gratitude arises, not a gratitude for things, but just a gratitude for this abundance, a gratitude for every moment. Every moment. And a quality of generosity that just flows out, not a generosity necessarily of things, but a limitless quality of generosity of spirit. And when the sense of abundance and trust together resonate with these qualities of gratitude and hopefulness and love and generosity, it's amazing. It's amazing. Let us just hold that and be that. Let us come no longer from a place of deficit, but a place of abundance, place of fullness, place of trust. That infinite generosity and infinite love might flow through us to bless our lives and the lives of others. But no matter what is happening, no matter what circumstance, even if we're the victim of some terrible thing, we can be grateful for this moment and hopeful in every moment. Now what I'd like to ask you to do is, with this additional experience and the tight interconnection of fullness and trust and hopefulness and gratitude and love and generosity, go into a breakout session again and not necessarily speak from these places, but speak about those qualities and the gifts that they provide and could provide to you and others, and anything you might want to share about the practice. Go over what questions you have, and when you come back, we'll just have a little wrap-up moment to just kind of talk about the experience, talk about the practice a little bit, and for those of you who want some further debriefing, you can stay during the after period where we'll just chat. But Kathleen, please go ahead, and I think she's moving ahead to put us into breakout groups.
Oh, we're ready. So just making sure if anybody has any questions before I send you off.
Yes, could you repeat what the core what our core assignment is, for lack of a better word?
Just speak about these transcendent perspectives that you've been experiencing, how they might change you, might change others, might change the world. And also just any reflections you might want to share with one another about the practice, questions you might have, so that we can debrief about it when you come back from the breakout session.
Thank you.
Right. See you all in 15 minutes.
Well, I had a fascinating time. I ended up just in a room with one other person who I've been working with a lot for the past 10 or 15 years. So we had a nice moment together. And before we engage, I just want to mention a couple of other things about the practice, sort of the non-dual aspect of it. And with every still point, like the still point of fullness, there's always an emptiness. I realize that there's an emptiness in the fullness and the emptiness. And then also a practice with every polarity of coming from your deepest witnessing place to witness what's been experienced very concretely or maybe even cosmically, and then allowing that witness to collapse into what's being witnessed, so there's no separation. And then there's what I call a whole involutionary practice, where we start with non-duality and then we just flow into in a descending or involutionary way of embracing transcendent qualities of being in the world from our coming from a place of non-duality. So that's just a little additional background on that. But I would just love to hear any feedback you have about the conversations you have, or further questions you have, anything you would like to bring up. We have just about 10 minutes.
Like so often with breakouts, I feel the sorrow of having unfinished, interesting, deep conversations.
Yeah.
We were just sort of not getting started. We were deeply into it, and I was eager to listen, and then we were just kicked out.
Yeah. Oh, there's nothing more wonderful than listening to beautiful conversation. And I feel with you on that.
I have a question of when you're working with, so you're in the transcendent, well, let's say I'm in the transcendent space. Let's say I'm in transcendent trust. And then something will happen in the world that will trigger me out of it. So is that the point where you work with it?
Well, it's certainly a polarity of its own, in a sense, being in the absolute or being in the relative, and move back and forth to one another. But ultimately in the practice, they begin to interpenetrate. And rather than being jogged out of a transcendent quality or finding yourself solely in the realm of suffering and everything that we go through as individuals, is to have a practice where they begin to interpenetrate, and you can hold them both. And so that's a real direction that can happen, so that it isn't so jarring to move from one to the other, or to be pulled out of a beautiful transcendent experience.
Okay.
I have a question for you, John, as well. I've always been puzzled by the word interpenetrate. Penetration has such an action element to it. I feel I experience some of what you're talking about. It is fluid. It is not penetrating. It's not having that agency in it that penetrate suggests from two sides. This kind of, it just doesn't feel right, the word.
Well, thank you. And anybody who's seen my charts over the years, they keep changing, because the words, we always find, oh, that's a great comment about that. What's another word we can use to get away from maybe like you're saying, because it is just a natural fluid thing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Suzanne, because I think that's my experience too. Maybe the shortcoming of the language.
Like an interflow, maybe.
Interflowing.
Yes, Thich Nhat Hanh uses the term interbeing and inter-are. We inter-are. Interbeing, inter-are. And so that I very much take Suzanne's point about the penetration is very agentic and has a lot of value loading and emotional loading to it. That we can maybe find other terms.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Masculine too.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just love this. I mean, getting an opportunity to learn something beautiful at every situation like this. That's so helpful. Thank you.
Thich Nhat Hanh has a beautiful, beautiful passage in one of his books where he does enter into interbeing. It is an experience to just hear it or read it. And it really does have a very different quality. Thank you, Karen, for mentioning that.
Yeah. Well, we're just in a waiting mode here. It might have shown up on the emails you've been getting, but I do have a website, www.ippinstitute.com. It's got a lot of content on it. It's a subscription website, but there's some free content as well for further introduction to the practice. And then if you get on our mailing list, you can be, aware of online courses as they might come along.
I put those
Was
links in
there,
the chat, John.
Thanks.
was there a PDF? There was something that I couldn't download.
There
Try
was a
it now.
PDF.
I changed the permission, so try it now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, I might say, because it's a PDF, some computers don't handle it, and it scrambles the text and scrambles the charts. And in that event, if you could get Word to me, I can send you a Word version of the article and send without the charts, and send the charts separately. And that's an introduction. It's an essay that belongs with another essay. It's IPP is going to be, that I'm writing now, is IPP in Service of Leadership for Flourishing. And that's connected to a working network sponsored by Harvard University that Suzanne's a part of, where we're sharing our various practices and work and research.
It just showed up, the PDF. For
Oh,
me
okay.
to try again. Yeah.
Okay.
Any
Any
other
comments
or
about that
questions?
last sharing period? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask the same. So,
Yeah. Be interested what some of you talked about or wondered about, shared about.
I'm going to invite Karen because she looks like she's got something to say.
I don't know. It was a joke, and it actually relates to Suzanne's comment about interpenetration and inter-R. I was in the course of our conversation, I mentioned Goethe. We were talking about the absolute love. Transcendent love is the great attractor. And I quoted the punchline to Goethe's masterpiece, his Faust, where Faust goes to heaven. And the last line is, the eternal feminine draws us on. And I said, well, if Goethe had been a woman, she would have written, the eternal masculine enters into us. And that's what I was smirking about just now. But we actually did in our wonderful group, we spent some time talking about masculine and feminine as one as the polarities.
Yeah, and I thank you for that comment. And I might say, particularly with the transcendent voices like transcendent love, we like to speak to the masculine or yang quality of love and the feminine or yin quality of love, and see if we have full access to that, and how they come together integrated as one, and wherever you are on the spectrum of orientation, having a full access to both of those qualities is so beautiful and powerful.
So we had a very rich, at least to me, very rich discussion of playing with some of those gender polarities as part of our return to the source.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And there was something for me, John, in that I use the metaphor of like, it feels like we had some acupuncture that got some things flowing that were just stagnant, and that it's like you invited the wisdoms of the transcendent selves to bring these polarities out into play.
It certainly is an invitation. I'm glad that's what it felt like. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
I'll just share because this feels alive. Like I just got this awareness of there's also the male surrender transcendent love and the female active surrender love that are coming forward with a relational beauty that I've never quite thought of before.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fun to just sort of endlessly play with what comes up. And we each have our own lenses and ways to share and to just be fascinated by the endless crystalline qualities of these prism views of the same universal consciousness and energy. It's just endlessly fascinating to to learn and be aware of the richness that's there in terms of experience and framing and narrative. And yeah.
That was a nice comment, because I was part of the sharing group with Karen too, and I notice in me the polarity, masculine and feminine, how I coupled feminine to the communion and masculine to the agency. But you can do 4 quadrants if you like from that too, like combine them in different ways. So that's something to explore, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Can
Hey,
you
I'm
say a
gonna
little
take-
bit more about
Go
the
ahead.
3, 2, 1 before?
We're at the close here, Jesse. So
Oh,
let's do
okay,
this.
all right.
Let's do this. I'll close out the formal meeting, and we'll go into the social meeting. And John, can you stay for a bit?
I can stay for 15,
Okay,
20
great. So you'll
minutes or
have
so.
access to John if you could stay. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and especially John. That presentation was wonderful. We have all the links in the chat so we can find out more. And also want to remind you to go to our website, sandiegointegral.org, and we have a donation button, a donation tab, and then we have our events tab so you can see what's coming up. We don't have our upcoming meetings in there yet, but we do have Kim Barta in February, and we've got some other things in the works for January, March, and April. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then for the informal part of the meeting, I'm going to pass the hosting duty over to Jerry. So thank you, everybody. And if you have to go, thanks for being here, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And we'll move into this, and this the tradition back when we had live meetings was that, you know, after the meeting we just hang out for an hour or so and chat. So you know, we want to kind of do the best we can here. So a couple of things. One is like, if anybody does have any questions for John, and maybe Jesse, that question you had, this would be a good time to do that. And as I've said before, one thing that seems to work pretty well is if you do have a question, if you go down to the reactions button and click the raise your hand button, then it'll queue up the people who have questions, and then we'll catch you in order. But this is just informal. There's no, you know, nobody's really in charge, and I'm a very, very light-handed facilitator. So we'll just kind of let it rip. And I would invite Jesse, if you want to go, if you're still here, if you want to go with that question, this would be a great time for that.
Looks like she dropped off. Did you catch that question, John?
You know, I didn't quite catch it. So did anybody else?
She was asking about the 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
But well, when I in this relational polarity, the still point is we have sort of a concrete version of it. So the stillness with regard to our concreteness, the stillness relating to our subtle bandwidth, and the stillness relating to our causal bandwidth. And in this relational, the concreteness is in the third person. I trust in that. I trust in this. And so that's what you would call the third person. Communion is you know, transcendent communion is a communion with the ultimate, and it's a second person relational aspect. And then union is to become one with, and no different than one with the ultimate, with the object. It's just oneness. So I think that's maybe what the question might have been about: a third person, second person, and first person perspective, which is also something that Ken Wilber has promoted as important dimensions of spirituality, with various traditions usually specializing in one or two, but almost none of them in all three perspectives.
Thank you, John. So anybody else with questions or comments on today?
Yeah, John, I really like how interactive you were with us. You not only talked to us, presented to us, but you do little exercises with us as a large group, as well as the breakout. So I really appreciate the style of format that you brought to us with your knowledge. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Larry. And you were the one person I felt a little bit badly about, because you began having a conversation about a transcendent voice rather than speaking from the transcendent voice. So I kind of interrupted you, but I wanted to sort of go through that exercise of, in that particular format, we weren't in analytical mode. We were more in sort of a, how does this feel from this place mode. But in spite of that, thank you for the generous comment.
Yeah, I'd really like to thank you. It was beautiful. My question is, and apologies that I do not know your process very well, but is this like a community process in which if there were disagreements or, coming from that fear place or the lower density, that you actually take people through to move them into the higher frequencies?
Well, voice dialogue is a facilitation tool, and I was trained in that by Genpo Roshi with the Big Mind process, which he developed over 20 years ago, and I was one of the first people to become a large group facilitator. And so it is a technique that you can use to be in a community conversation. It doesn't work so well if a person moves into a place of trauma or struggle, because the community isn't necessarily the best way to hold that, unless it's a community that's been set up for that purpose. And I don't have a therapeutic background, so I tend not to do that. But we use IPP principles in this Unify initiative that I chair to help people come together across their differences, be held in a space together so that there can be more sharing and vulnerability and openness to create a deeper, richer community. And we work with that, in many interesting ways. With people in the democracy movement, but also in multisectoral and multi-generational type settings. I don't know if that's was helpful, but
yeah, that's more what I was asking for. I know you went into like the experience, but I guess my question is that the process in which you use for that?
We tend not to be as we have particular workshops where we might use this PP technique in the Unify arena, but we tend not to use voice dialogue as much as use the knowledge of working with the polar dynamics and how to be still and hold the space so that people can come together, and also be aware of the developmental aspects that are percolating and try to weave people together intuitively, knowing how those qualities work.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question, John.
Yes.
How much did the Big Mind process influence these voices of like transcendent love? I mean, I don't remember that, at least in the video I saw on Big Mind, I don't remember a transcendent love voice.
I mean, it's really a variation of Big Mind, Big Heart. It really is. I mean, that's very core to the Big Mind process. And if you can simplify it down to anything, it's that non-dual quality of oneness and moving out of that with one foot in oneness. It's all about love. And that's so powerful. And that's usually where I start. And it's really where the data is, or the research data is, the essence of flourishing is love is at the center of it. But what I did is I took a group of people after I got trained in the Big Mind process and wanted to add a developmental aspect to it. And then as we spoke to different voices that would characteristically come up at different stages of development, there was always a kind of a polar voice said, you know, I want to speak right, but there's got to be a deeper unified piece here, and kind of discovered the still point, which is sort of a causal quality, sort of the concreteness of the poles and the subtle flow, and then the causal stillness, and then ultimately kind of the non-dual quality that was built into the practice. So it all just kind of emerged over a period of years. But what I was trying to do is not have a practice that was so centered on the classic Buddhist concept and voices, but you know, they're all there in virtually all of the traditions anyway, when, you know, whatever language you happen to use. But very deeply influenced by my training and experience in the Zen tradition with Genpo Roshi. But I was doing it at the same time that I was a bishop in my own Christian tradition, so always trying to hold things in that way too.
May I ask what your specific Christian tradition was?
I'm a Mormon. I'm a Latter-day Saint.
No kidding. Are you still?
I am.
Awesome.
Yeah. I just try to bring some of these deeper patterns into.
That's an amazing split to straddle.
My practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make a strategic decision. Do I try to be an influencer
or
whatever? So that was my choice.
Interesting. I'm just going to comment just to keep the conversational ball going, that I've been trying to do a survey in the last month. Just what is enlightenment? What do people mean by enlightenment? How do you know if you are or aren't? And so on, a huge spectrum of answers, and there's no one answer. But eventually, the people who seem to know most what they're talking about, it all boils down to transcendent love. Always seems to be the punchline. And so I was just delighted to see this to be kind of the ultimate transcendent orienting point here too. I'll just toss that out.
I wouldn't argue with that. Yeah. That's different from a lot of the meditative traditions is the ultimate, the enlightenment, or the ultimate, the real self is this place of enlightened oneness. But I have the polarity of the absolute and the relative. And I frame it in a subtle way, the universal divine and the uniquely personal, so that when they come together, the universal cosmic qualities flow through you, and you're able to provide gifts through your life, through your utter uniqueness that nobody else holds. And so each of us who are conscious and have a practice become aware of the particular gifts each of us have to bless each other and ourselves and the world that nobody else can through our utter uniqueness.
Well, interesting to hear you speak of the polarity between absolute truth and relative truth. That's another one of those very profound polarities, and I'm just for fun here, and since you have a background in Christianity, I have often wondered where it talks in the New Testament, it talks about the sin against the Holy Spirit which will not or cannot be forgiven. But it's not defined. They don't say what it is, and I sometimes wonder playfully if the sin against the Holy Spirit that will not be forgiven is taking a relative truth and making it an absolute truth, taking it for an absolute truth. So that's, I'm just playing here.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And I would say the ultimate truth combines the relative and the absolute in some way, so that they're deeply, can't say interpenetrating. They flow into one another, inform one another.
They inter-are.
Yeah.
So are you still a functionary in the Mormon Church? Do you still meet and work with
Well,
going to church?
my assignment is to be a teacher of gospel doctrine, which is interesting. So I teach it in my own way.
Wow.
Yeah. Teaching the Old Testament this year has been really interesting.
John, how would you relate the notion of transcendent love as you're using it with Christ's love as expressed through Jesus?
To me, there's no difference. To me, this is a quality of love without limitation or qualification. And to me, if it's understood any other way, it's just too limiting. Doesn't mean there aren't consequences to actions that are harmful, that you can't have judgment about that, or you can't have consequences, but the love is still there, as I feel it and understand it.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to sort out is, I think if I'm hearing it correctly, and I might not be, transcendent love is part of a polarity.
Well, to me, they're the classic relative polarities, but when they come together and you have this quality of deep transcendent trust and communion, is transcendent love, and there's no polarity about it. It's everything.
So it sounds like you did. Hold on. So it sounds like you just said, you got cut out for like 5 seconds, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It sounds like you're saying that what Christ's love was not then the transcendent love, which is a polarity. It's the transcendent piece, but Christ was an embodiment of the unitive, the non-dual.
Well, the relative coming together into oneness is beyond a polarity.
Right.
It's but you can experience the relative and the absolute, and that becomes its own polarity in terms of practice and experience. But the transcendent love, all of these transcendent qualities are cosmic, they're universal, there's no way to divide them up. They're grounded in the absolute and embrace us fully, and we can embrace them fully. And any deviation from that is probably something to work with.
Okay, I don't know if I'm not hearing it. So Jesus wasn't enacting transcendent love as a polarity. He was enacting a non-dual love.
That's right.
Transcended the polarities.
Yeah, I mean, whatever language you use, to me, it was a divinely sourced, universal, unlimited, unqualified love. That really was, in terms of my experience of it, my experience of big heart, big mind. It's just, it's the same thing, different words, but grounded in oneness, grounded in the absolute. But love is the penetration. Again, my language problem is the emergence, the flow into the grace of the absolute, embracing our relative lives.
John, Mary would like to know how we can continue in group practice. She's asking by taking classes through the Institute.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, Kabir has the background and capacity, who's part of your group, that he could lead a group practice, certainly.
Yeah, he was ill today, or he would have been here.
Yeah.
He was going to do your introduction, but
oh, well, Jerry, I certainly appreciated your kind comments.
And speaking of comments, there's some really nice comments in the chat about for people that have left, that we're thankful and grateful for the experience. And
oh, well, thanks so much. It's been wonderful to be with you. I probably ought to be on my way, but thanks for this opportunity to share a little bit of this practice with you.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Well, thank you, John. It's
Take
great
care.
having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Well, folks, without John here, do we have any other Anybody, maybe somebody who hasn't had a chance to speak would like to comment? Or
Eric just raised his hand.
Yeah.
Oh, no, he
sure.
was waving goodbye. Okay.
Oh.
Never mind.
I have one. It was put in the link in the chat, a link to a flourishing paper that he wrote, IPP flourishing paper. Does anyone here recall how that was referenced or what it was about? It's quite a long read, so I was hoping to get a review if I missed it, if he spoke about it.
Oh, it goes into depth. I have a tool that that reads PDFs out loud, so I listen to it instead of slogging through it as a read, because my attention won't last through a 42-page document otherwise. But it's more of the framework and more it just goes way more into depth than you went into today. So it's worthwhile, I think. You're unmuted, Lisa. Were you going to say something?
The only thing I wanted to bring to the larger group that I said in our breakout group is that it was a really great opportunity to go into a mood. I mean, that's what I felt like. It was really fascinating that there's, clearly the speaker's a very intelligent man and he's working with intellectual frameworks, but he sort of went over the intellect and went into the big mind. So that was a great experience.
Yeah. So is there anybody here that hasn't experienced big mind? Oh, not you, Mary. Okay. Oh, and you haven't, Karen? I don't know where to find the original video anymore. Do you have it, Jerry?
Wow, I don't know, but I would think there's probably something on YouTube, but I haven't looked there.
Yeah, I've looked and I've only seen excerpts from it because I think it was like a two-hour video originally. And there was actually
I was gonna say it was like probably what 15 years ago, and here at San Diego Integral, we all watched it together.
Yeah, and we have a couple members that were there, a couple members that aren't with us anymore, but they were founding members of Integral Institute, and they were able to be in the audience there. That was Paul and Ann were in the audience there. It's a classic voice dialogue thing where they start you off like he invites the voice of the controller and the voice of the protector and ask what the role is and stuff like that, and then they lead you through these kind of like he did today through more and more transcendent voices, and the bottom line is getting to big mind, big heart, which is it's an amazing 2-hour transcendent experience. So we'll see if we can find it. And
yes, if you can find it and kind of communicate, send the link or whatever to the rest of us, I would be very interested.
Or do a session.
Yeah, do a session with it. That would be wonderful.
Actually,
yeah, I'd be interested too.
So I just looked on Amazon, and Big Mind, Big Heart, Finding Your Way by Genpo Roshi is available there. And I would imagine that there's a link to, some processes there, but that's the book that goes through it in depth, Big Mind, Big Heart.
So that's
Genpo
a book.
Roshi.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
There's a book, but the video takes you through the experience, and it's surprisingly powerful.
Yeah, it would be different. That would be like an induction, a living induction. Yeah, that's what I'd be interested. If you ever dig up yours, the one you were talking about, I would definitely be interested.
Yeah, I had it for a long time, but with all my drive shuffles over the years, somewhere it's somewhere, but
somewhere in the big mind.
We probably watched that on a VCR.
Yeah, we probably did. Derek or Patrick, anything you'd like to bring to the conversation.
You know, Eloy, I was just curious, is has anybody thought about having Genpo Roshi on? Would he come and do something like this for San Diego Integral?
He's on our list, but I don't think anybody's contacted him yet.
Okay.
That's a great idea, though. That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, rather than using a book or a VHS tape, and then you've got to buy a VHS recorder, why not have if Genpo will come?
Yeah, no, good idea.
Yeah.
All right, Jerry,
And
you
thanks
got
so
that
much.
action item. Just kidding. Yeah, thanks, Eric.
I'm seeing a YouTube video of Genpo. It's 2.5 hours.
Oh, you found it. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, stay on.
Let me
Can you copy the link into the chat or something?
holiday season. Let me get the link without the commercial here. Try this out, see if it works. Yeah, it looks like it works. So I don't know if that's
great. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if that's him talking people through the process, because I'm skipping ahead in the video. So I don't know if that's actually him talking people through the process or him just talking about it, because it looks like it might be him talking about it, looking at.
Yeah, it seems like maybe we're at a break point here. So
yep.
I'd say it's about time to wrap it up, folks. So thanks, everyone.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
See you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Love to all.
Lots of love.
Bye.
Yes, thanks. Bye.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.